with each other fiercely like arch enemies. It seemed as if they derived some sort of twisted pleasure from this brotherly fighting.
Consider, for a moment, just how many bosses you've slain throughout your entire lifetime of playing video games. Has it been hundreds? Maybe thousands? Tens of thousands? Maybe even 100,000 bosses? Maybe you don't really know, and that's okay too. But allow me to ask a question to you who has at least triple-digit numbers of notches on your belt. What is your favorite kind of boss fight? Because when you think about it, there are several different categories of boss fight. Maybe you like the big, crazy spectacle fights. Maybe you prefer slow, somber, powerful boss fights. You might even consider mini-bosses to be a little bit underrated. And don't get me wrong, these are all great answers, but they're not my favorite kind of boss fight. My favorite are the duels. After giving it some thought, the impact of a good one-on-one single-player duel really can't be understated, at least in my opinion. In terms of a type of boss fight, it's definitely the one that sticks out the most in my mind, and probably had the most impact on me as well. I want to say since I played DMC 1 for the first time as a kid, fighting Nello Angelo that first time really made me think, huh, this guy kind of fights like I do. And in my mind, I sort of treated it as an honor battle. For instance, anytime I fight Nello Angelo, I refuse to use items in any context. Why would I use screen-clearing holy waters if Nello Angelo can't use them either? And he can't heal, so I can't use vital stars. And this is definitely just a me thing, but also, whenever I went into playing games that are more multiplayer-centered with their duels, say anything from the Soul series for instance, I took it upon myself to never heal in a battle against another player. Not unless they did it first, of course. I know that that's sort of a commonplace thing whenever regarding duels in the Soul series, but at the time I didn't know that, and how could I have? I didn't follow any of the Soul-centered creators at the time, I was just kind of playing Dark Souls 1. But that's sort of the thing. It just sort of invoked those memories of fighting characters like Nello Angelo or Virgil in DMC 3. Going against an opponent with a similar moveset and fighting style as me and all that other stuff. So then eventually I got to thinking about it and I said, you know, I've never seen anybody talk about a duel-style boss fight before in a YouTube video, and hey, now we're here, I guess. Through the use of a couple of examples, I want to highlight what makes these duel boss fights special. What is their impact in a narrative sense? How are the character similarities between the player and the opponent highlighted through the gameplay? And what sort of cheeky things did the devs do to make these boss fights what they are? And on that note, we're only going to be looking at 2 examples today because I'm pretty much constantly pressed for time currently. But even still, the 2 examples we do have today should be plenty fine in terms of what I actually want to get across in this video. That being said, if there's maybe an example you wanted me to cover, then hey, leave it in the comments as always. I like talking about this stuff and I want to see what kind of favorite boss fights everybody has, just, I don't know. Talking about video games is cool, I guess. With all that being said though, let's go ahead and get underway.
No doubt you've got some fun planned for me. Right, Virgil?
Right, so I guess we can start by addressing the weird blue-coated anime edgelord here. So, this is Virgil. Say hi, Virgil. That means he likes you. You might argue that Virgil is a character that doesn't necessarily need any introductions. And I would agree with you, but we do need to talk about some of his character details just a little bit here. It's a part of the context that makes his boss fights so important. So if you'll allow me to massively undercut the lore of DMC for a minute, Virgil is a character across the entire DMC series. He first appeared in DMC 3, which is why I'm showing off this game in specific, and he's one of the 2 sons of Sparta. Sparta is a character who is extremely important to the entire world of DMC because he ended up saving humanity because he turned coat and ended up fighting a bunch of demons despite being a demon himself. All of this is to say that Virgil is an extremely powerful character in the world of DMC. He's also, in some ways, the polar opposite to your character in Devil May Cry 3, Dante, otherwise known as the twin brother in this scenario. Dante is similarly extremely strong, comparable to Virgil certainly. The main difference with Dante, though, is that he acts a lot more aloof than Virgil. All of this is to say that Dante messes around a lot more mid-combat, and Virgil is a lot more self-serious. Virgil carries himself with a certain upright manner, and Dante just sort of runs around making weird wahoo pizza man noises. Anytime there's a boss fight between Dante and Virgil, the atmosphere is extremely tense. There's in-game years of tension between these two, and all this pent-up anger and misunderstanding follows through into the boss fight itself. And properly fighting Virgil here for the first time in the entire series means that they can do some pretty crazy things. On the one hand, he acts as a pretty blatant roadblock to your progression and your skill ceiling currently. Virgil is the skill ceiling, more or less. DMC3 is a hard game, don't get me wrong, especially if you're playing the original version. But this dude acts blindingly quick. He moves faster and hits harder than anything else in the game that you've fought so far. But at the end of the day, he is just kind of a dude with a sword. Luckily for you, you also happen to be just a dude with a sword. And this is where we're going to get into our first subsection of dual boss fights, the rival fight. I think more so than any other type of boss fight in a video game, the rival boss fight needs to be very carefully characterized. This is the one and only time that video games get to handle body language properly, and in a weird and unorthodox way as well. You could make an argument for maybe cutscenes or something having characters communicate by waving their hands, or how they carry themselves in a conversation, and that's fair. But to me, it's the combat, it's the fighting, it's the mechanics that really sell a character's personality without saying anything. Notice just how little Virgil moves in this boss fight. He doesn't run around anywhere, he kinda just teleports places. This to me really accents some sort of mysterious persona that he has. And Virgil is definitely not the kind of guy you want to let your guard down with. The dude hits really, really hard. Every action that Virgil does sort of demands your attention, because of how fast they are, because of how much he hurts. And the entire time he's just acting like a cocky, hoity-toity little thing. If the boss fight prior to this one didn't unlock easy mode for you, this one will. Let's just put it at that. But let's move on to the familial connections now too, because there are a bunch here actually. Consider for a moment that these two are twin brothers. Dante is younger by a little bit, and Virgil's definitely the kind of guy to have that sort of hanging over Dante's head the whole time. But think about how Virgil carries himself. How he taunts the enemy with superiority. He's arrogant and cocky, like I said before. But when you think about it, so is Dante. All of these games reward you in a certain way for pressing the taunt button against an enemy. I don't think it's crazy to say that Dante is pretty cocky too. He's also just really confident, and I always read it as him being super bored in any combat scenario. He's just trying to make things more interesting for himself because he knows he's going to win. The only real time this comes into question is whenever he's fighting his brother because he knows how strong he is. Even with all this being said, the similarities don't stop there. Fast forward to the second and third boss fights with Virgil. I would like to make the case that they sort of act as foreshadowing for different aspects of gameplay. For one, when you're actually fighting Virgil in the second fight, he swaps weapons to Beowulf, which is a hand-to-hand combat style weapon. After you get done with this boss fight, you end up getting Beowulf, and you basically have all of Virgil's moves when he's using that weapon. Going even beyond this, all of the games have a hand-to-hand style combat weapon, and between both Dante and Virgil, their fighting styles are extremely similar. They are brothers after all, and it would make sense if they sort of picked up tricks and trained in the same fashion. But then take a look at the third boss fight, where Virgil suddenly gets Force Edge. This sword is incredibly important to the lore, and we're going to gloss over it a lot here, but for now just consider how similar it is to Rebellion, Dante's main weapon. It's another longer broadsword style weapon, or greatsword style weapon, however you want to classify that as. In this third and final fight for the game, Virgil deliberately uses your exact moves. He uses Helm Splitter, he uses Stinger, and he even puts his own spin on a lot of these attacks. It's made even more interesting whenever you get the ability to play as Virgil in the special edition for DMC3. Because whenever you start the game in that mode, you get access to all three weapons for Virgil. You get Yamato, his katana, you get Beowulf, and of course you get Force Edge. Because this weapon shares so many similarities with Rebellion, it's seen as sort of the gateway weapon between playing as Dante and then moving into Virgil. You can see it as sort of a transitionary weapon in its own weird way. Despite this, Force Edge is never outclassed or overshadowed by anything else. It has its own perks, and because Virgil likes to put his own spin on familiar attacks, they have their own uses in combat. But things get really interesting whenever Virgil starts using his katana Yamato in conjunction with Force Edge. This is where that personal flair starts getting brought up. What's more, did you happen to notice the shape of his summon swords? What they're based off of? They're Force Edge. Virgil is a character who is enraptured by the idea of getting stronger and growing more powerful. It's memed all across the DMC community for a reason. And it's because he seeks power from this weapon. He knows what it's going to turn into. He knows what it means if he can get it completed. So his fixation for this weapon, for this want of power, is characterized by the main method of attacking he has. Well, his main ranged weapon, you know what I mean. And man, whenever you get to unleash Devil Trigger against Virgil and meet him one-on-one with his own Devil Trigger in the second and third fight, that is just the coolest thing. It's part of the reason why so many people like DMC3 the best out of the entire series. That, and then a whole bunch of other stuff that makes that game good. And yeah, I have nothing more to say other than I totally get it. This is good characterization, and what's more, it's a good rival fight. But how else can we handle a dual boss fight in a video game? Maybe against two characters who aren't necessarily rivals. Well, for that, let's go ahead and take a look at our second example.
Put out that cigar. Connecting oxygen hose to interior connector. Put on your mask. Does this panty waste know what he's doing?
I'm trying really hard to come up with like a proper introduction for Metal Gear Solid 3 and how to introduce it. I don't think I have anything really, so I'm just gonna say, Metal Gear Solid 3 is really good. Many people consider it to be their top game of all time, and while it's not exactly my top pick, I understand why plenty of people say that. MGS3 is an experience where the entire time you're playing the game, something new is happening. Just as an example, within the first hour of gameplay, your mentorial motherly figure betrays you and throws you off of a bridge. Why is she doing this? Why is she so good? You don't really know yet, but it looks really cool. She just field strips your gun immediately within a blink of an eye. The game has to do slow-mo for it, and it's really cool. And then just minutes before this happens, yeah, Metal Gear Solid is, like, really weird. In all honesty, there's a good handful of boss fights that you could pick for a duel or rival fight. The final boss as just an example. In truth, you could pick that final boss fight just by itself and it would make for a wonderful example. But what I specifically want to highlight here is not necessarily rival boss fights. Those are good, but they're a little bit different to a regular duel. A duel you can have with just about any random Joe Schmo carrying the same weapon as you and has vaguely the same body shape as your character. And they serve different narrative purposes as well. No, instead, what I want to highlight is a specific kind of boss fight that only really Metal Gear Solid does, more or less across the entire series. And what is that boss fight? Well, it's something that the fans like to call the Sniper Duel. Did anyone say sleepy photosynthetic old man? No? Okay, great, here's the end.
Welcome back, boss.
On the topic of context for the end as a character, that's not exactly necessary. We'll talk about it a little bit, just it's gonna be even more glossary than talking about Virgil. The End is a member of the Cobra Unit, a special forces squadron that used to work for the US. All of the Cobra members, including their leader, the Boss, formerly known as the Joy, have now defected to the Soviet Union. Why are they doing all of this? Doesn't matter, you don't need to know that. What you do need to know is that the End is the greatest sniper of his time. And even though this game is set during the Cold War, his time is very much in the distant past. That doesn't mean that you necessarily need to let your guard down, though. The setting and atmosphere in this boss arena is very atypical for just about any boss fight in video game history. It's a wide open map with plenty of clearings and plenty of places to hide. But the pacing of this fight is deliberately slow. Essentially, the goal here is for either you or the End to hunt each other until the fight ends. The End's weapon of choice, of course, is a sniper rifle, hence calling this boss fight a sniper duel. And during the boss fight itself, you can tell where the End is based on a couple of clues that you have. See, because the important elements here in this fight is not only the stealth, which is something that Metal Gear Solid does plenty well already, but also hunting and tracking. There are many ways to go about this fight correctly. For instance, if the End has his rifle trained on you, you can use the glint of the scope to roughly find where he is. But you need to act quickly because yes, his weapon is trained on you, which means he's going to let loose a shot here in the next couple of seconds. This is crazy and intense, and you need to make a split-second decision on what you need to do next. Do you try to go after him and just kind of duck and cover where you can? Or is it too far and you just need to find cover right now? While you're under fire, you might be asking the question, is there other ways I can find him? And why yes, actually, there is. If you have the thermal goggles, you can actually see him pretty easily. And if you can't see him as a silhouette from whatever thermal vision is going on currently, you can see his tracks in the ground, and you can do this whether or not you have the thermal goggles. There's even more to it than that, though. See, the End likes to keep a pet parrot around. Little bird friend that he just has, and I don't know, it's Metal Gear Solid stuff, it gets weird. If you happen to find this parrot talking to you, though, you can capture it if you use a tranquilizer. If you decide to capture it, hold it in your inventory, and then throw it out mid-boss fight, it will fly to the End in an attempt to get away from you, and of course, you can use this to track him as well. And just going past the mechanical eccentricities of this fight, the tension built up by not only the environment, but also the narrative going on is really cool too. The End will do this little boss fight banter, just quips and stuff, right? But he does so under a hushed tone because he's focusing on you, he's trying to line up the perfect shot. With this, you know that he's only moments away from loosing that shot on you. And there's honestly a ton that makes this fight extremely interesting. There are plenty of people who will say that MGS3 is one of the best games ever made, and again, I get that. I don't necessarily agree, but I do get that. But there's also plenty of people who say that the End is one of the best boss fights in human history, in video game history. If you're playing this game for the first time, you come across this boss fight and you're trying to figure out how it works, it can take you up to an hour to figure out how this guy fights. And if you think there might be a repeat playthrough issue because of how this fight is paced, well, there's actually a whole bunch of cheeky ways to get around the boss fight itself. The End may or may not be one of the best snipers in the world in the game's story, but at the end of the day, he is just a sleepy old man. So one of the things you can do is actually snipe him before the boss fight even starts, and you don't have a boss fight anymore. You do have to fight the Ocelot unit in his boss arena, which is arguably worse, but nonetheless, that decision is there for you. Do you want to fight a bunch of ads, or do you want to fight the boss fight? What's more, the End is actually very close to the end of his lifespan, like, a lot closer than you think he is. If you were to save and quit during his boss fight, and then reload the game no sooner than a week, then the End will just die of old age. I'm not even kidding. Snake is so upset about it in the codec call.
Drop your weapon. Drop your weapon! Major, I found the End. He's dead.
What the hell happened?
Maybe it was from old age.
You mean he kicked the bucket in the middle of a battle?
Maybe.
Well, Snake, the victory is yours.
No, I don't think so.
What do you mean?
It was his dying wish to fight me. but I disappointed him.
Snake, listen to yourself. This is a mission. It's not a game, it's not a sport. You think you're competing for the gold at Tokyo or something?
I guess you're right.
Just focus on completing the mission.
Yes, sir.
Bro just wanted to have a good fight, like, I don't know, can you blame him? I consider Metal Gear Solid 3 to be one of the video game peaks of attention to detail and all the things that a player can do that the devs thought about. I know that there is at least one person screaming Red Dead Redemption 2 at me, and I know, I see you, and yes, I promise I'll play it soon, I'm sorry. But if you decide to get familiar with Metal Gear Solid 3 and just figure out how much stuff there is in this game, then I think it's pretty easy to say that this is still a top contender for just, wow, look at how full of things this game is. Both Naked Snake and The End are very different characters in a narrative sense. They don't necessarily have any similarities to speak of, but nonetheless they can have a duel, a one-on-one fight, between two particularly powerful characters and two extremely strong weapons that they have. And there's something to be said about the nuance of just that entire situation. Long story short, duel boss fights are awesome. Whether it be two dudes with two swords just swinging at each other, two guys with big rifles just shooting at each other, or even two like-minded characters just expressing their philosophies to one another. Regardless of what form the duel might take, I think you can agree with me that this kind of boss fight is incredibly nuanced. A type of event that needs to be very carefully considered, very deliberately implemented. And I think regardless of their story importance or mechanical nuance, I'm still of the mindset that they're my favorite kind of boss fight. And that's it. That's the end of the video. And actually, the last video of the year, I guess. As I've said many times already, if you like what I have here to say today, then remember to like and subscribe. I know I've brought it up in a whole bunch of other videos before, but this is my literal last chance to say this, so, for the final time, honestly, if you do like what I make here, then please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers before the end of the year, and we are only days away from the next year. If you enjoy variety-style video essays, then I cover things like retrospectives, general game discussion, and even reviews sometimes as well. And who knows, I might even do some new stuff for the next year as well. I got some ideas cooking in my head, stuff I'm really excited for. If you felt like I missed talking about a specific example for a good duel boss fight, then, as always, bring it to the comments or bring it to the Discord. The Discord's free to join, and if you decide to hop in, you can talk with either me or other members of the Discord to just discuss about video games or play stuff together. If you want even more from me, then you can join the Patreon for $1 a month. Doing so will give you access to sneak peeks for future videos, as well as letting me read your name out loud at the end of those videos. But hey, at the end of the day, I hope you just enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and have a good day, everybody. Oh, and happy holidays.